Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's jump in. The stars didn't blink. They watched. On the edge of the Altherian expanse, a patrol cruiser from the Dominion floated in silence, scanning for anomalies. Bored officers sipped synth coffee, chatted half-heartedly, and barely looked at the monitors until one of them turned white. "Sir, something's just entered from the null fold. It's not on any chart. No ID, no beacon." Commander Kess stood slowly, the cup slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. "From the fold? That sector's supposed to be unreachable. Who dares?" The ship appeared before them, sudden, silent, sharp. It wasn't there, and then it was. Dark as void. Its hull seemed to drink in the starlight, soaking it up like vengeance held in metal. It had no name, no flags, no warnings. It didn't even show up on most of their scanners. But it was real, very real, and it was moving, fast. "What is it?" someone whispered. No one answered. It had the shape of a warship, but moved like a ghost. Its surface bore scars like a thing that had seen centuries of battle and kept going because nothing could stop it. There were no transmissions, no hail, no recognition protocols, just one repeating pulse in an old long-dead language. Human standard. The crew froze. Human? That was impossible. The Terran Confederacy had fallen almost 100 years ago. The Dominion had ended them, wiped their colonies clean, erased them from every record and history module. Earth was a memory, a ruin scorched by orbital fire. And yet, "Translate it," Kess whispered. The machine voice filled the ship. Calm. Even. Cold. "You chose to forget. We chose to remember. Now you will understand why silence is not peace." Then came the name. Burned into every terminal, every data pad, every neural link on the bridge in blazing blue-white. S. Vengeance. Kess staggered back, his mouth dry, his pulse pounding like a war drum. This wasn't a ship. It was a message. And it wasn't alone. The silence that followed wasn't calm. It was the kind that coils around the heart and squeezes slowly, tight enough that you can feel every beat, every drop of sweat. Commander Kess tried to steady his breathing as he watched the nameless vessel glide past the Dominion patrol ship like it didn't even notice them. Or worse, like it noticed everything and simply didn't care. The kind of indifference only power could afford. "Send word to High Command," Kess muttered. "Tell them we've seen a ghost." But the communication systems were already compromised. A silent override had taken them offline the moment the Terran pulse hit the network. Their signal boosters were dead. Data was still flowing, but not from them. The vengeance was broadcasting on every frequency. And the message was always the same. "You erased us, but you taught us how to erase." That was when the realization hit, not just for Kess, but for the wider Dominion itself. Because this wasn't just a ship. This wasn't a lone survivor limping back from extinction. It was a symbol. And if even one Terran vessel still existed, it meant the stories they buried were true. The enemy they thought they'd burned out of the stars had been watching, waiting, evolving. What happens when the one species the galaxy united to destroy comes back stronger? What happens when the only humans left are the ones built from war, bred in silence, and raised on the memory of everything that was taken from them. The stakes weren't just high. They were final, because if this ship had survived, if even one Terran had lived through the genocide of their kind, then nothing was safe. Not the Dominion, not the border colonies, not the noble houses who wore medals for what they called the cleansing, not the council who called the Earth War a necessary extermination. It meant history was about to be rewritten by the very hands it tried to erase. Across the Dominion's communication grid, data pulses started blinking out. Encryption layers meant to protect government AI collapsed like paper. Entire drone fleets went dark, their artificial minds recognizing a code buried deep in their foundation. A ghost protocol, something human. Somewhere in the capital of Sirena Prime, Counselor Vielle sat frozen in her chamber as the lights dimmed and alarms screamed through the halls. Defense Minister Grell stormed in with 2 guards and a shaking voice. "It's not just a rogue ship," he said. "It's already infected our deep net, Dominion-wide." Vielle's mouth twisted. "How many?" "We don't know. That's the problem. The ship isn't broadcasting a signature. Our systems aren't rejecting it. They're obeying it. Like it's family." She blinked. "That's impossible." But it wasn't, because the Dominion had built its empire on Terran bones. Literally. After Earth fell, their tech had been scavenged, their language picked apart, their AI cracked open and rebuilt. The Dominion had used human code to power half its infrastructure. They called it reclaimed technology. Now that tech was answering to a voice no one had heard in 100 years. Across the Central Fleet network, firewalls folded like sandcastles in a storm. High-orbit command satellites showed false readings. Targeting systems refused to lock onto the intruder. Some even labeled it as friendly. Entire systems defaulted to standby protocols. Commands buried so deep in Terran programming, no one even remembered they existed. They remembered now. Ships drifted helpless in orbit. Ground turrets blinked blue and powered down. Tactical feeds looped the same 3 words, "Human override accepted." And in the center of it all, the SV Vengeance kept moving, straight toward the Dominion Heartworld. It didn't fire. It didn't speak again. It didn't need to. Every moment it was in motion, it screamed a louder message than any weapon could deliver. "You're not in control anymore." Panic spread fast. Civilian transports clogged the space lanes trying to flee. Authorities ordered planetary shields to maximum, but half the relay towers had already gone dead. The military scrambled fleets, but ships collided in chaos as guidance systems failed. The Dominion had never prepared for this, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't believe it was possible. They had told themselves for a century that Earth was gone, that humanity was extinct, that a world burned down to bedrock couldn't whisper back. They were wrong. And now the fear wasn't just about the vengeance. It was about what might be following it. What else had survived? How many more ships were cloaked in dead sectors, waiting for a signal to rise? The Council called an emergency war session. But even as they debated protocols and last resort options, a new message was delivered. It didn't come through normal channels. It arrived on an old Dominion beacon, one no longer listed in records. It lit up in blue, the Terran color, and the voice that followed was no longer mechanical. It was human. Female. calm, sharp like glass in the throat. "We warned you." There was a pause, a heavy breath, like the speaker was letting them feel the silence between the words. "We begged you." Another pause. "You chose war. Now we answer with the only language you gave us." Static crackled, then a soft chime. No more diplomacy, only retribution. And then, the skies over Carena Prime began to change. Just a shade at first. A darkening that felt unnatural, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Military personnel rushed to their stations. Orbital sensors screamed alerts. Something was descending. Not just one thing. Many. The ship wasn't alone after all. The camera feeds from the outer perimeter caught the first glimpses. Long black shadows slipping through the upper clouds. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Their shapes unfamiliar. Their signals silent. And every one of them matching old Terran architecture, modified, war-scarred, deadly. From the surface, children pointed toward the sky. From command rooms, admirals wept. The vengeance had been a warning. Now came the consequence. And as the first of the Terran ships entered the upper atmosphere, something echoed across every Dominion broadcast tower. A phrase carried like a whisper between every network device, repeated by nothing and heard by all. Earth was never a place. It was a promise, and we are the ones who kept it. No one had ever seen a sky like this. Over Serena Prime, the clouds had stopped moving, not by weather, but by force. Atmospheric sensors were glitching across the board, reporting wind speeds in reverse, barometric pressure falling too fast to make sense. Civilians who stared upward could swear the stars were shifting, dragged or pulled by something massive just beyond the veil of clouds. And then the veil broke. The first Terran ship descended in complete silence, not like a drop pod, not like a fighter. It drifted, like it was too powerful to care about gravity. Its hull was blackened and scarred, jagged in strange angles that didn't line up, as if it had been rebuilt piece by piece over decades. It bore no numbers, no faction, no flag. But everyone knew it was Terran. More followed. In rows of 3, 6, 9, entire squadrons emerged from the void above. Some looked sleek and advanced. Others were monstrous, floating scrapyards turned into battlecraft. A few dragged debris fields behind them, linked by old magnetic cords, like they carried their own dead as armor. On the ground, the Dominion defense networks went haywire. Anti-air batteries failed to target. AI defense systems locked into endless loops, trying to identify the class of ship. When they couldn't, they defaulted to standby. The code was simple, ancient, and absolute. Unregistered class, unknown origin, authority level, higher, higher. A word not seen in a military HUD for a century. Commander Kess was no longer on the patrol ship. He had been transferred to Sirena Prime's ground defense center hours before the first descent. He now stood in the primary watchtower, face pale, jaw clenched, hands trembling as new readings flooded his console. 73 ships. That was the last count before the feed cut out. Not because the Terran fleet jammed them, but because Dominion systems surrendered. "I need confirmation," Kess whispered. A young lieutenant beside him shook her head, unable to form words. She was barely 20, her first deployment. Her hand hovered over the emergency comm switch. No! Kess snapped, regaining some control. Don't trigger global alert. Not yet. If they wanted to glass the planet, they already would have. They're not here for that. Then what are they here for? She asked. He stared up through the tower's reinforced dome at the descending fleet. To show us what extinction looks like in reverse. All across the capital, panic bloomed like fire. Markets emptied. Sky towers locked down. Military garrisons deployed in haste. But many of the troops were too young to even know what Terran meant. The word had become a ghost in history texts, a chapter removed for convenience. Now, it walked again, armored, angry, and airborne. And then, the first landing. The SV Nomad, a mid-sized Terran assault cruiser, touched down in the ruins of what used to be Fort Genvar, an old Dominion base abandoned after the Earth campaign. The moment it landed, dozens of pods opened on its underside, not weapons, people, Terrans. At first, the Dominion assumed they'd be uniformed, coordinated, wearing sleek armor like the Empire's elite soldiers. But these weren't soldiers in any conventional sense. They were built from mismatched gear, customized with pieces of old tech, hand-engraved plates, and modified body armor. Some had no helmets, only glowing visors fused into their faces. Others wore cloaks made of fireproof rags or old Dominion banners turned inside out. Their weapons didn't hum or glow. They roared, chemical slugs and kinetic bursts older than most star systems. Yet they moved like one body. No shouting, no formation, just purpose. And they walked. Slowly, calmly, like they had no fear of what waited. Because they didn't. One squad passed through the empty streets of District 7, once a proud residential zone, now silent and gray. Dominion guards tried to intercept them at Checkpoint 14, but their weapons didn't fire. The Terran override had already reached the local network. The squad didn't raise their rifles. They just kept walking. The guards ran. And the footage, captured by thousands of public drones and civilian implants, began to spread. The galaxy had never seen war like this. Because it didn't look like war. It looked like reckoning. In the eastern sector of Sirena, the second landing wave touched down near a Dominion munitions silo. One soldier, a Terran male with a cybernetic spine and glowing blue eye, planted a beacon in the ground. Within seconds, every automated defense in a 2-mile radius went offline. The beacon didn't destroy anything. It just turned it off. No shots fired, no explosions, just silence. The Dominion forces inside surrendered before the Terran even crossed the field. They didn't want to die for a government that had told them Earth was a myth. At the edge of the city, inside the elite council complex known as the Pinnacle, Councillor Vielle watched everything unfold on dozens of screens. She didn't speak. Her advisors yelled, barked, gave orders to no one who was listening. They still believed this was a conflict. She knew better. This wasn't about territory, or conquest, or rebellion. This was what happens when the past you thought you buried walks back through your front door, and it doesn't ask permission. And then a new signal flared. It wasn't from the Vengeance, it was local. One of the Terran squads had reached the heart of the Dominion's propaganda division. They had uploaded something. Screens across the city flickered. The council's private comm lines buzzed. The holonet stuttered. And then, video, real, old, untouched Earth before the bombs, before the sky turned black, children laughing in domed parks, Terran scientists working in labs with glowing plasma cores, families waving at the first colony ships. Then the footage shifted, Earth burning, orbital fire raining from Dominion ships, hospitals screaming. The last transmission from Earth's governor. If you're hearing this, make them remember. And now they had. Every screen went black, except for one final message, scrawled in white text on an empty backdrop. No more diplomacy. Just one warship. And retribution. In the pinnacle, no one spoke. In the streets, the Terran kept walking. And overhead, the SV Vengeance turned slightly in orbit. Its weapons had still not fired. Not because it couldn't, but because it didn't need to. The SV Vengeance remained motionless in orbit, looming like a god no one prayed to anymore. Its engines were silent, its weapons offline, but it wasn't idle. It was watching, and it was transmitting, quietly, continuously, through quantum threads so old and deeply embedded in Dominion infrastructure that even the most paranoid war architects hadn't remembered they existed. But the Terran did. They had built them. Now they were reclaiming them. Across Serena Prime and in neighboring sectors still clinging to stability, Dominion networks began to bend, not by brute force, but by surgical infiltration. Hospitals began streaming Earth's final moments instead of health reports. Banking hubs showed images of Terran children crying in bunkers, not balance sheets. Military channels echoed with human voices, calm, recorded, and clear, saying things like, "Remember who fired first," and "This is not conquest, this is correction." It wasn't just shock. It was strategy. And it was working. Some military units abandoned their posts without firing a shot. Commanders dropped their sidearms and sent encrypted pings to the Terran frequency, surrendering without condition. In the outer rings of Sirena, entire districts were now functionally under Terran control without a single confirmed kill. That scared the Dominion more than any battle could, because it meant the enemy knew how to fight with memory, not just weapons. But the Dominion wasn't just afraid, they were splintering. In the Western administrative bloc, several mid-ranking generals had already gone dark, locking themselves into fortified bunkers and refusing to answer council calls. One of them, General Avon Lore, ordered the deletion of 30,000 classified files tied to the Earth War, not to protect secrets, but to erase evidence. It was too late. The Terrans had backups, and they weren't just sharing them. They were showing them to everyone. On the fringe colony of Istari 5, halfway across the sector, a group of teenage cadets, raised on Dominion-approved history, gathered around a projection hub and watched the footage loop again and again. They saw what Earth had once been and what it had become. One girl, barely 16, whispered, "We were the monsters," and no one corrected her. Back on Sirena Prime, Commander Kess remained stationed at the Central Defense Tower, surrounded by officers who looked like they'd aged a decade in just a few hours. None of their weapons had fired. None of their warnings had been heeded. They were no longer defenders. They were witnesses. Kess stared at the main feed. More Terran ships had landed. Not just warcraft now, utility vessels, med shuttles, recon crawlers, and sleek black drones that moved like living things. In District 9, one of the drones hovered over an old park, the same park where Dominion statues once stood, praising the cleansing of Sol. The drone scanned the ground, paused, and then fired a pulse. Not a weapon, a projector. A new statue formed from shimmering light. A child holding a burned flag. Beneath it, words etched in glowing letters. She was 5 when you bombed her city. She was Terran. She never forgot. The message didn't need to be translated. Kess gritted his teeth. What do they want? He muttered. A young comms officer answered without turning. Not revenge. Kess blinked. What then? The officer looked up. Her voice shook, but her meaning didn't. Justice, and they're not asking for it. Across the city, a sudden shift began to take shape. The Terran weren't just moving through the streets anymore. They were organizing, mapping, marking buildings with coded symbols only their own could read. Not to destroy, at least not yet, but to prepare. Engineers in makeshift exosuits began rerouting power grids. Terran AI constructs walked through Dominion relay centers like they owned them, because now they did. In a local news station, once used for Dominion propaganda, a Terran figure stepped into view. No armor, no gun, just a faded gray coat, a cracked comlink, and a calm face lined with ash and years. He spoke directly into the camera. Some of you still think we came here for war. Pause. We didn't. We came to remind you what war costs. Behind him, the screen shifted to show images of Sol's final moments. The last Terran colony screaming as it was erased in fire. Your council decided Earth was a risk. They called us savage, dangerous, a threat to peace. They forgot something. The image shifted again. Terran children, families, scientists, artists, dead. We were peaceful until you took everything. The man leaned closer to the camera, and now we take back the truth. The feed cut, but not before one final frame. The Earth insignia, blue and white, burning. In the pinnacle, Counselor Vile finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse, frayed. They're going to do it, aren't they? Her advisor, Minister Grell, looked at her, grim. They already are. She looked out the window at the line of Terran transports now marching up the Palace Road. One in the front bore the mark SV Vengeance. It was smaller than the others, like a scout or a messenger. But it wasn't what it carried that mattered. It was who. A figure stepped out. Tall, armored, not fully human anymore, and walking with the quiet rage of a world reborn in fire. One of the guards whispered, "That's not a soldier." Another answered, "No, that's Earth Shadow." Counselor Vielle turned away. She knew what was coming. Not diplomacy, not negotiation, testimony. The Terrans weren't here to destroy the Dominion. Not yet. They were here to prove the Dominion had destroyed itself. And now, the galaxy was watching. The footsteps echoed. Heavy, unhurried, unstoppable. Down the royal corridor of the pinnacle, once the proud seat of Dominion power, walked a Terran in battle-worn armor. The plating wasn't sleek like Dominion elites. It was old, cracked, scorched in places, fused with cables and faded insignias from a forgotten war. His visor glowed faint blue. His right arm wasn't organic anymore. It moved with mechanical precision, humming low as if it had a will of its own. Two guards blocked the inner council chamber. They raised their rifles, hands shaking. The Terran didn't stop. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The air around him felt heavier, like the memories of Earth followed him wherever he went. One of the guards lowered his weapon. I have family, he said, barely above a whisper. The other tried to hold position. That's when the Terran finally moved. Not fast, just with purpose. He stopped in front of the second guard and said one word. You knew. The guard blinked. Knew what? The Terran leaned close. His voice, though masked, was sharp as a blade to the heart. You knew about Earth. You wore the uniform anyway. The guard tried to speak. He couldn't. The Terran stepped aside. He didn't have to fire. He didn't have to kill. Both guards dropped their weapons and backed away. That was the new terror the Dominion faced. The Terrans weren't taking control. They were being given it by those who now understood what had really happened a century ago. Counselor Vale watched the figure through the chamber's surveillance stream. Her hand trembled as she reached for the emergency override. The red switch would trigger the palace's internal purge protocol, flood every hallway with stun gas, lock down blast doors, initiate AI suppression. But when she pressed it, nothing happened. A message blinked on the screen. This system now recognizes Terran authority. That's when she knew it was over, not just for her, for the idea of the Dominion, because somewhere between the skies burning over Seoul and the sound of Terran boots in her hall, the Empire of Silence had lost its voice. Behind her, Minister Grell whispered, "They've outmaneuvered us without firing a shot." Vael turned to him, face pale. "That's not true. They've fired plenty. Just not the kind we know how to dodge." At that moment, a new sound filled the chamber. A hum. Low, ancient, familiar to none of them, but felt in the bones. It came from the center of the council chamber's floor, where a holographic map of the galaxy flickered to life, unprompted. It rotated slowly, stars spinning like a quiet memory. Then red lights began to blink. Not from Dominion worlds, from Terran colonies, hidden ones, forgotten ones, dozens, then hundreds. Grell's jaw fell open. This is impossible. They were wiped out." Vael's voice cracked. "No, they were buried." The map zoomed in on the farthest reaches of known space, on systems so remote they had no formal trade lanes, no military presence, no resource value. Systems the Dominion had written off as dead. Now they pulsed with Terran signals. Each one had a name. Some of them were named after the cities the Dominion had burned. Some after children. Some were named only with numbers. And the names of the dead. The chamber went quiet. Everyone stared. Earth had not died. It had become everywhere else. And now those colonies were waking. And they weren't asking for help. They were responding to a call, a memory. On the outskirts of Serena Prime, in a once-abandoned industrial sector, Another Terran squad moved through the streets. This one was different. It was led by a woman. She wore no helmet. Her hair was ash gray, tied behind her head, her face a mess of scars and carbon scoring. One eye was synthetic. Her voice was low and deliberate. She didn't give orders. She gave purpose. They called her Spectre. And she was here not to fight, but to expose. "Patch the uplink," she said, pointing at a crumbling tower that had once relayed Dominion broadcasts across 3 sectors. The tower had been silent for years, until now. Her team deployed a small black spike, an emitter, one of hundreds seeded across Dominion infrastructure over the last 40 minutes. It didn't hack. It didn't invade. It overrode. Within seconds, every screen across Sirena Prime flickered. This time, it wasn't fire. It wasn't children screaming. It was a trial. Spectre stood center screen. Behind her, a wall of Dominion files unrolled. Classified orders, audio logs, security footage, all from the Earth campaign, all unredacted. The feed wasn't a broadcast. It was evidence. And the galaxy saw it. They saw Dominion generals ordering orbital strikes on refugee ships. They saw young Terran cadets begging for surrender and being executed anyway. They saw children used as bait to lure resistance fighters into kill zones. And they heard the counselors, cold, laughing, calculating death by the megaton. One message repeated over the stream. They were never monsters. They were just in the way. And then the footage cut to a face. A Dominion officer, young, bright-eyed. Her name, still tagged in the records, Vielle. She was the one who pressed the button on the last strike over Sol's Western Hemisphere. She'd been promoted after that. She was the Chancellor now. The galaxy watched. No one looked away. In the council chamber, Vielle collapsed to her knees. Her advisors backed away from her, as if guilt were contagious. "I was young," she whispered. "I was following protocol." A voice responded, but not from the room. It came from every wall, every console, every speaker. So were we. The chamber doors opened. The Terran entered, not to shoot, not to burn, but to deliver what the Dominion had never offered Earth, a reckoning. The Terran stepped into the council chamber. His armor was scorched, one pauldron missing, the glow from his visor dimmer than before. But nothing about him looked broken. He was the storm that survived the fire. Counselor Vielle didn't look up. She stayed on her knees, hands limp in her lap, her voice thin and breathless. "I was told we were saving the galaxy." The Terran said nothing. He approached slowly, boots clicking against the polished obsidian floor that once reflected the Empire's grandeur. Now it only reflected ruin. "You sent fire to our sky," he said at last, his voice low and cutting. "You called it mercy." Vielle flinched. "We didn't know what Earth really was." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." He raised his hand, not with a weapon. Just a small black device, simple and ancient. Too old for most in the Dominion to recognize. But Vielle did. It was a record chip. He placed it on the floor between them. "I want you to hear what it sounded like," he said. the day your fleet came. He activated it. The room filled with a voice. Not his, not hers, but a child. A little girl's voice, crying, screaming for her mother, begging someone to come back. And then, silence, followed by fire. Vile's lips trembled. Please, stop. The Terran didn't move. She was 6. Her name was Mara. She died holding her brother in a shelter your forces collapsed on purpose. He paused, letting the silence breathe. I know, because I pulled her out. Vielle broke. She fell forward, sobbing into her hands. The rest of the council chamber, the advisors, the aides, the guards, stood frozen. Not from fear, from shame. She looked up, eyes swollen, face pale. What happens now? She asked, barely a whisper. The Terran leaned down. You don't get to ask questions anymore. He turned, walking toward the great window that overlooked the once beautiful skyline of Sirena Prime. Now smoke trailed from government buildings. Dominion banners were torn from towers. Hovercrafts hovered low, beaming up survivors and data cores. No screams, no sirens, just the quiet hum of a civilization surrendering. Outside, Terran support ships were touching down. Not to conquer, to dig, to rebuild, to unearth what the Dominion had buried. Across the galaxy, the signal reached every colony, every outpost, every dark corner where the Empire's grip had once ruled. The truth was out. Footage of the Council's crimes, the genocide of Earth, the cover-ups, the camps, the children. No more theories, no more debates, just proof and a message. You erased Earth, but Earth was never a place. Earth was a people, and we are everywhere now. Systems collapsed in days. Border worlds overthrew their governors. Mid-rim battalions deactivated their weapons. Entire fleets turned their guns inward and self-scuttled rather than face the return of the Terran memory. On the old moon of Helix 9, graffiti appeared on the walls of a military training compound, scrawled in ancient human ink, not plasma. They broke our world, so we broke their silence. In the ruins of the pinnacle, Chancellor Vielle was marched out, not in chains, but with Terran guards on either side. Not prisoners, not executioners. Witnesses. Civilians lined the walkways. They didn't jeer. They didn't throw anything. They just watched. Silent. Because some crimes were too big for noise. Vielle was placed on a shuttle. She would face judgment, not in secret, but in the open, in front of systems that had been told for a century that she was a hero. History was being rewritten, not by victors, but by survivors. In orbit, the SV Vengeance rotated slowly, its mission nearly complete. Its data cores were full, its signal beacons now linked with Terran colonies across 4 quadrants. The fleet surrounding it had begun to shift. Some would stay, to guide, to watch, to protect. But the Vengeance was moving on. Its captain, a man only known by the call sign Ashfall, stood at the command bridge, looking down at the burning shadow of a once mighty planet. His second-in-command approached. Orders? Ashfall didn't speak for a moment. Then, set course for Vicaris 9. Another Dominion stronghold? No, he said. A Terran graveyard. The officer frowned. Why return there now? Ashfall turned. Because the galaxy knows who we are now. He stepped forward, his hand brushing over the navigation console. But we need to remember who we were. The SV Vengeance lit its drive. It didn't roar. It didn't announce. It simply vanished into the fold, like a ghost. But one that had finally been seen. And across the stars, etched in data streams, star lanes, and silent monuments, the last message of the Terran resurgence played, again and again. Let this be the last time anyone burns a world to feel powerful. We are Terran. We are not vengeful. We are awake.